Thank you so much for the introduction and the invitation to take part today among such distinguished company. So I'm going to talk about, actually it follows on very nicely from the previous talk by Hongjian, about what is it that makes a country ready, capable of using AI to increase productivity. And I thought I'd start by looking at some figures on how much different countries are using AI already. And the short answer is we don't really know. So here's one example from Microsoft research showing that there's a positive correlation between GDP and AI use. Other data suggests that the tech sector are clearly the biggest users already. All of this is based on surveys that typically cover the extensive margin of use, so not how intensively are people using the technology within activities, but are they using it or not? And this is somewhat puzzling if you look at the United States, perhaps, that it doesn't seem to be as high in the user share as you might expect. Different data from Anthropic about the use of Claude suggests that the US is way ahead in its use. So for these kinds of surveys, there's clearly an issue about the sampling frame that's being used. And what is it being used for? Well, we don't know that either. Often AI is being bundled with standard services like Copilot with Microsoft. It's being embedded in devices, so people might not know that they're using it when they're responding to surveys. The chart at the bottom here is from the Stanford Annual AI Index report showing how many medical devices have been approved by the AI medical devices have been approved by the FDA. So that's increasing extremely rapidly. The other panel looks at different geographies, and it suggests much higher usage rates than the first chart that I showed you. So there's been a big increase between 2023 and 24, but the figures here, the 70%, the 80%, they're much higher than on the previous chart. And again, we don't know what organizations are using the AI to do. And so we're in a bit of a statistical fog, although more surveys are coming out all the time. I think the one thing we can say for sure is that usage is increasing. But what it's being used for matters a lot for the productivity impacts. And so just to step back, we often think about the models, or we think about gadgets like smartphones when we're thinking about the impacts of technology. But it's process innovations that are the main drivers of productivity growth over time. This table comes from my recent book, and it just lists some of the major process changes over time through the 19th and 20th centuries that led to, across the economy, quite significant increases in productivity growth. And, so for example, the original digital spread led to production networks, the way that production was divided across supply chains, across geographies, an increasing specialization. So Adam Smith's division of labor and specialization being taken one step further by those kinds of technologies. So the question for me now is, what kinds of process innovation might AI enable, and what will the capabilities to enable that need to be? And so this is an illustration of the complementary investments that need to be made. And for people who know the Paul David article that this refers to about the spread of electrification, this will be very familiar. But the argument he made in this classic article was that it took 50 years for the productivity gains from electrification to be manifest throughout the economy. The picture on the left is a steam-powered cotton mill in the north of England, and these are built around large steam engines which have a shaft that goes through all the different floors of the mill and drives machines that are clustered around that central shaft. The ability to put an electric dynamo on each piece of equipment meant that the assembly line could be invented. The flow of production could then change to a more logical structure, enabling division of labor within the factory. But that required building new plants, and the image on the right is the original Ford plant. And you can see it's not very tall, it's very spread out. And alongside that, of course, there was other complementary investment needed in the economy. So the electricity grid itself, those networks, the reconfiguration of people's patterns of where they lived, because spread out plants were no longer in city centres, they were on city outskirts, so the housing and transportation structures changed. And then ultimately, the invention of consumer electronic devices that drove demand even further. So this was a long drawn out process, and the complementary investments needed to capture the benefits of electrification were large. And there's every reason to think that this is going to happen now. If we want to see process changes through the use of AI, it will require organizational change and infrastructure change. So what does make a country AI ready? As economists who do growth accounting, we often think about how does technology drive total factor productivity, the A in the equation, or how does it affect the inputs that are used? What we're talking about now is how does AI change the actual process of production, the production function itself. And so our focus needs to be directed towards what are those changes going on in organizations. We are doing a lot of work with organizations, qualitative as well as quantitative work, to try and understand how companies, businesses are now embedding the use of AI in their processes. And the answer in short is not much yet. How do we know what's going on? Well, we can look at the inputs for sure. We already heard about the energy constraint. That's going to be important. There's the labour input, which we might think about the skills needed. Analysis of the labour market focuses on what tasks are people doing, what expertise. We need to think more about how a task is being rebundled and reconfigured. Data as an input. I think this is now a growing area of literature, but in terms of quantification, there's more work needed here to understand how much data is needed and how much value is it adding to production processes. There's the question of quality change and technical advance. We just heard how rapidly the models themselves are advancing. So in trying to understand the potential uses at the intensive as well as extensive margin, we want to understand that. One area that I think will be very interesting to look at in terms of measuring what's going on is how people are using their time. As consumers, we now spend an awful lot of time online, looking at our screens, and looking at the activities that people are doing online is captured in time use surveys. There's much less information about how do people use their time at work. But if you're interested in how are organizations changing, how are tasks being rebundled and changed, then we need to start gathering data on how people are using their time at work. Not just what tools, but how much time are they saving through using AI tools and doing existing tasks, and how much is that changing the workflow end to end within the organization. And then finally, a bit of a tangent perhaps, but production boundary changes. If you go back to the original Gary Becker work on time in the economy, he had an aside in that paper that the movement of activities across the production boundary could substantially change your interpretation of measured productivity. If we think about women in many countries going into the paid workforce in the 1960s and 1970s, that will have had a substantial increase on measured productivity growth in the formal economy. Now, as we see activities moving out from the market into the household sector, equally, this is changing how we interpret measured productivity, and at least some part of the productivity slowdown in the statistics will be a reflection of changes from paid activities to unpaid or household sector activities. So that's how we might start to know better what is going on across different countries. We also should be thinking about infrastructure readiness, and that's if you like, the platform of tangible and intangible assets on which different organizations, both public and private sector, can build their own activities. If you're thinking about the use of AI across the economy, there are lots of coordination challenges. In any technology, there's a question of setting standards, and there are plenty of examples where a standard set unleashes the scale of the market and enables rapid learning by doing, brings costs down, enhances diffusion. In some of the complementary assets for AI, there are large network effects, and so that too is a kind of coordination problem. There are, in particular, if we're going to the agentic AI economy, questions about intellectual property and legal liability, and also do agents need identities? So a digital public infrastructure has an identity layer, and countries like Estonia or like India, for example, that have that, are seeing rapid building of new businesses using that digital identity layer. But do the agents themselves need a formal identity? So how is that entire soft infrastructure framework going to work for agentic AI? And then there's the question of the data layer. There's a lot of data in economies that is untapped, but figuring out the terms of access, the credentials for access, how to structure and organize the data, how to enable privacy when different types of data are being linked together. A lot of very detailed questions in that. And I think there are not many economies that have got very far in thinking about the institutional frameworks for both the identity layer and the data layer. But the private returns and the productivity of using AI will depend very much on economies assembling this whole digital public infrastructure, the whole stack. So a big challenge there for many countries. One way to think about this is through a public value framework, which I have used in different roles in the past, where often if you're thinking about an investment project, you're in the left-hand column here, you're in the direct column. This is the cost-benefit analysis column. And you can think about benefits to individual citizens or to public and private sector organizations. And there we are thinking about immediate efficiency and cost efficiency gains and cost savings. And then you can go on to thinking about what are the spillovers and the coordination or network effects that you can capture. And then you can go on to think about what are the longer term dynamics of the kind that I know Brian has been very focused on in his work. The text on this slide is from the UK Treasury, and it's an evaluation retrospectively of the creation of the one login for UK citizens to government services, and seeing how that fits onto this public value framework. And so this is you can see that the way that they thought about it was very much focused in the cost-benefit side, the immediate efficiencies, and much less in the dynamic and market shaping aspects of this. But you can see that this framework provides a way of thinking about what is the infrastructure need and where are the gaps in public infrastructure to enable the productivity gains to be built on top of that. So the question about national capability or readiness for AI comes down for me to enabling these process changes. What is our markets dynamic? Is there enforcement of competition policy so that startups can get into the relevant markets and so that new business models can become viable? We know that there'll be labor reallocation that goes on. In past technological revolutions in recent times, governments have not done a great job at helping people make that transition. And so thinking not only about skills and long-term provision of skills, but also enabling transition for individuals is part of the institutional, the social process, if you like, of using AI, because without that, we're likely to see quite a lot of resistance within organizations to change. Why would you encourage, enable adoption of a technology that might put you out of a job? There's this question of what Joe Stiglitz and Andrew Greenwald have called a learning economy. Where are the feedback loops? Are the policy institutions such that lessons can be learned relatively rapidly in an agile way and fed back to adjustments in policy if necessary? Mechanisms of accountability. And so this goes to the point about liability. We have had a very large scandal in the UK of the Horizon post office scandal, where many people who ran post offices were falsely accused of fraud, some were imprisoned, and many had their careers and lives ruined by it. And the computer system was wrong, it was making errors. We can't if we want to see AI spread and its use be enabled in automatic and agentic ways, there are going to need to be mechanisms of accountability, liability, and redress. And that, I think, is a big institutional challenge. Supply chain bottlenecks, and I won't belabor that because those issues are very well known, but everything from chips at one end to skills at the other end. And then finally, this question of organizational change. So here are the people working on an old-fashioned assembly line, and we're obviously having people work in very different ways now. And to my mind, organizational change is going to be one of the slowest things to limit the diffusion of AI throughout the economy. Just one final slide, and I think AI requires economic analysis to take some steps forward as well. In the labour market analysis, we've been very focused on task-based models, and that's a great perspective, but I think going beyond that to understanding the way that processes change in that end-to-end way will become important. We're doing a lot of work that's on this border between classic industrial organization and management studies, organizational studies. One hypothesis about the impact of AI on organizations is that it will enable the capture of contextual tacit knowledge, which might reverse the decentralization in organizations we've seen in the past 30 or 40 years, and a return of hierarchy. And there's a question about what does that devaluation of tacit knowledge mean for organizational structures, the way people work, income distribution, and so on. Integrating the microanalysis of organizations with the analysis of industrial sectors or markets or ecosystems or regions, however you want to frame it, but that mid-level between micro, what happens in firms, and the macro level, both of which I think are better analysed at the moment. And then this question about vintages of capital. I've put here an image of Cambridge, where I'm sitting now. It refers, of course, to the two capitals controversy back in the day, where the idea that capital is fungible won out in the end. But when you're talking about periods of technical change, the embodiment in both physical and human capital means that different vintages have different quality and different affordances. And I think revisiting these vintage models will be really interesting. And then finally, using AI in economic research itself, which I think is now starting to happen very quickly, but it offers us a fantastic new tool for economic analysis. So that's a whistle-stop tour through a few thoughts about what makes countries ready and able to use AI to improve productivity and living standards, which is what ultimately we all care about. So thank you so much.